For 50 years, Charles Schulz drew peanuts every single day. Became the world's most well-known cartoonist and earned millions. But one phone call in December 1999 altered everything. "It's over," Schulz told his family while sobbing in his studio. 4 months, the creator of Charlie Brown had concealed a terrible secret. He had trembling hands. He was losing his vision. And he had received bad news from doctors. Peanuts would be eternally changed by what transpired in that room, shocking millions of fans who were unaware of what was about to happen. On November 26, 1922, Charles Monroe Schulz was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Carl, his German-born father, was a barber. Prior to being a stay-at-home mom, his mother, Dina, worked as a waitress. Her ancestry was Norwegian. They had little money and lived in a little house. Dina's workplace was close to Carl's little barbershop. Their only child was named Charles. He spent much of his childhood in St. Paul. However, they were forced to relocate to Needles, California, for 2 difficult years during the Great Depression. Charles's perspective on the world was greatly influenced by his battle to make ends meet. He was always affected by seeing his parents struggle to make ends meet. Many years later, the Peanuts character's minor anxieties and melancholy expressed similar sentiments. Charles's uncle gave him the moniker Sparky just 2 days after his birth. It was inspired by Spark Plug, a well-known cartoon horse from the Barney Google comic strip. In 1922, that horse gained popularity, and many children were given the moniker Sparky at the time, but none rose to fame as much as Charles Schulz. Cartoons seemed to be a part of his life from the beginning. Even during his career, he was referred to as Sparky rather than Charles. Charles was just 7 years old when the Great Depression struck in late 1929. The barbershop owned by his father lost business. They had to relocate multiple times. He was uncertain of everything. He subsequently described their time in Needles, California, as unusual and terrible since it was so isolated and strange. He was always afraid of losing everything. He recalled periods when they were without food. When Charlie Brown was concerned that they might go hungry if his father lost his job, he even put that in peanuts. Charles was familiar with that sensation. He had experienced it. Spike was the name of his dog as well. A black and white hunting dog, Spike performed things that other dogs wouldn't. He consumed rubber, tacks, nails, and even razor blades. And he was all right somehow. When Charles was 14 years old in 1937, he sent a drawing of Spike to Ripley's Believe It or Not. It was released on February 22, 1937. His drawing was reproduced for the first time at that location. For him, it was everything. He felt a great sense of pride. Spike comprehended almost 50 words and was able to ring doorbells. He wasn't just a pet. However, Spike died after being struck by a car when Charles was around 10 years old. He was severely affected by that loss, which lingered in his heart. That memory later gave rise to Snoopy. His mother encouraged his art despite their lack of resources, purchasing supplies for him when they could hardly afford food. His dad didn't think drawing could be a legitimate career. It seemed stupid to him. The house became tense as a result. Carl urged Charles to cut his hair or do something useful. Dina encouraged him to pursue his goals. For him, his mother's support was crucial. Unfortunately, she fell ill when he was still a child. She passed away at the age of 48 from cervical cancer in 1943. He was broken by it. That following week, he was being drafted into the army. She was never able to witness his success. Every drawing he produced after that seemed to include a fragment of her. Charles began attending Richards Gordon Elementary School in St. Paul when he was 6 years old. They advanced him by 2 grades since he was so intelligent. However, that simply made life more difficult. He was smaller and younger than the others. He was continuously harassed by the other children. He was quiet and bashful. He was out of place. Forever after, he felt the agonizing sensation of being excluded. It evolved into Charlie Brown, the youngster who, despite his best efforts, never quite fits in. Charles should have been pleased when Ripley's published his spiking artwork in 1937. However, his peers made fun of him instead. The drawing was deemed stupid. Not even his teachers were concerned. Early on, he understood that being successful did not guarantee that others would like him. Sometimes, it made matters worse. His comics repeatedly reenacted the lesson. Things didn't get much better in high school. He received a 0 in physics and failed Latin, English, and algebra. Each and every drawing he attempted to submit to the school yearbook was turned down. He was devastated. They didn't even explain why he had put in so much effort. He was plagued by that rejection for the remainder of his life. He even made his previous report card public at the age of 53 to show that he wasn't as stupid as others thought. His mother was diagnosed with cervical cancer in 1938, when he was only a youngster. Over the following 5 years, she gradually deteriorated. Initially, no one informed Charles of its gravity. But every day he witnessed her suffering. She wept a lot. Medication hardly made a difference. To lift her spirits, he started creating comics. There was nothing else he could do. To enable his dad to swiftly check on her, they moved into an apartment above the barbershop. Charles watched her gradually disappear. At night, he would be awakened by her cries. 3 days prior to his deployment to the war, on February 28, 1943, she passed away. The expression in her eyes that day stayed with him forever. Charles participated in an art education school's mail order course in 1940 at the age of 17. It cost $170, which was a significant sum at the time, many months' worth of his father's earnings. Despite Dina's mounting medical expenditures, Carl continued to pay it. Charles studied everything, including calligraphy and figure drawing. They occasionally lacked the funds for electricity. He therefore operated by candlelight. He kept using the same materials till they broke. He even acquired a job grading art for the same school later on to help pay for extra lessons. He was learning that pursuing your dreams required sacrifice, and he carried that lesson with him forever. Charles was recruited into the Army in February 1943. He joined the 20th Armored Division and rose to the rank of Staff Sergeant. He commanded a squad of 50 caliber machine guns in Europe. He landed his battalion in France on February 19, 1945. They marched across combat zones for more than 1,400 miles. They landed at Dachau on April 30, 1945, a day after the camp was freed. Survivors were strolling close to their vehicles. Charles was always reminded of their appearance. He was forever haunted by that tragedy. Despite being in charge of a gun squad, he only fired once and neglected to load the weapon. Nevertheless, the German soldier gave up. One of Charles's proudest honors for his service was the combat infantryman insignia. He had one final opportunity to see his mother before shipping away. He took a quick detour from Fort Snelling to pay her a visit. She was dying. "We'll definitely acquire a puppy when I return," he told her during their last conversation. He kept that vow close to his heart. Later on, Snoopy turned into the dog, which he was never able to show her. Charles had changed by the time the war ended and he returned in late 1945. He was traumatized and grieving. The little apartment above the barbershop was his new home. Despite his thoughts of suicide, he continued to draw. In July 1946, he accepted a position judging drawings for meager pay at art instruction institutes. Even though it seemed like he was going nowhere, he had seeds for the future in his office. Characters from Peanuts were inspired by some of their co-workers. Among them was Donna Mae Johnson, a woman with red hair. He fell in love with the red-haired accountant, Donna Mae Johnson, back in 1947, before he had his big break. They dreamed and ate lunch together. She seemed like the one to him. He made the proposal in 1950, right before Peanuts was released. However, Donna declined since she was already engaged to Al Wold, a man she had known for many years. Charles was broken. He referred to it as the most agonizing loss of his life. It was heartbreaking to watch someone you love leave and get married to someone else. That heartache remained. It was immortalized in the tale of the little girl with the red hair who never returns Charlie Brown's love. Lil Folks was the title of Charles Schulz's very first comic strip. It began in the Minneapolis Tribune on June 8, 1947. It later relocated to the Pioneer Press in St. Paul. Every time it was published, he only received $10. The comic strip continued to run until January 22, 1950. However, he was crushed by the editor. Schulz requested that his comic be moved from the women's section to the actual comics page. He requested additional funds as well. The editor declined. Schulz had to resign after almost 3 years of trying. He was only 24 years old at the time, living above his father's barbershop and struggling to make ends meet as a cartoonist. It was a devastating loss. His first real break had come from Lil Folks. He persisted. In 1950, he repeated the concept to United Feature Syndicate, but they informed him that the name Lil Folks was too similar to existing comic strips. The syndicate disregarded Schulz's suggestion to use Charlie Brown or Good Old Charlie Brown. From a list, a production manager chose the name Peanuts. Before selecting it, he didn't even read the strip. Schulz felt ashamed. He claimed it lacked respect and labeled it the worst name ever. For the remainder of his life, until his death in 2000, he detested the name. They never changed it, despite his repeated pleas. On October 2, 1950, the first Peanuts strip was released. There were only 7 newspapers that carried it. Over the course of the first month, Schulz only earned $90. He continued to take on side jobs because that wasn't enough to support him. Gravestone lettering was one of them. Charlie Brown was shown passing Shermy and Patty in the first comic strip. "Charlie Brown, good old Charlie Brown," Shermy replied with a smile. However, he turned and exclaimed, "I hate him," in the final panel. That sinister turn mirrored Schulz's innermost feelings. On October 4, 2 days later, Snoopy made his debut in the comic strip. However, the initial reaction was severe and sluggish, even with him. By 1952, things had started to alter. Peanuts expanded from 7 to 40 newspapers. That was a surge of over 500%. Schulz persisted. In September 1952, he presented a baby Linus Van Pelt. Later on, Linus emerged as the strip's sane voice. However, editors strongly objected when Schulz permitted Linus to quote passages from the Bible in the late 1950s. Linus read a distressing chapter from the book of Jeremiah in one of the 1961 Christmas strips. Some publications sought to completely ban Peanuts. Schulz had no choice but to compromise. Though he never made religion the focal point of the strip, he utilized Linus to discuss faith. The only way to save everything was to do that. Schulz married in the midst of all of this. His marriage to Joyce Halverson took place on April 18, 1951. She has a small daughter named Meredith and was 22 years old. She was adopted by Schulz, who insisted that she was his biological daughter. However, things were still difficult. Schulz was so impoverished at one point that he had to pawn his art supplies in order to cover the expenses. The only things keeping him alive were those tools. Even so, Schulz vowed that he would never compromise his artistic vision, regardless of what the syndicate desired. Even though they later had 4 more kids, Schulz remained mostly focused on his career. According to some, he was hardly there as a father and husband. Everything was altered by Snoopy. He was just a typical dog when he made his debut in 1950. He remained silent while walking on all 4s. On January 9, 1956, however, an unexpected event occurred. He was able to stand. It was not Schulz's intention. "Snoopy just did it," he remarked. The strip was forever altered by that moment. By 1957, Snoopy was always walking straight. He became Joe Cool, the cool dog, the struggling writer, and the flying ace of World War I. Snoopy was no longer merely a pet. He was a worldwide celebrity. People began to recognize him as Mickey Mouse or Coca-Cola. In 1952, Linus' security blanket made its debut. It became into one of the most contentious concepts in the strip. Though he never referred to it as a comfort blanket, Schulz was influenced by his daughter Amy's favorite toy. The readers did. A psychologist came up with the name transitional object around the same period in 1953. Arguments broke out. The blanket was deemed unhealthy by several specialists. Letters of rage were sent by parents. However, studies revealed that around 70% of children had an emotional bond with toys or blankets. The argument became much more heated as a result. The most emotionally invested character in the comic strip was Linus, who was also the wisest. People were astonished by that paradox. Peanuts were featured in almost 100 publications by 1955. At that point, Lucy's well-known mental health booth appeared. Though it offered therapy for 5 cents, it appeared to be a lemonade stand. Lucy would offer smart counsel on weighty subjects. After World War II, Schulz's own treatment sessions gave him the idea. Parents were perplexed. Deeply held anxieties like anxiousness and responsibility were discussed in a children's comic strip. However, children adored it. By 1958, Peanuts appeared in 40 foreign and 355 American newspapers. Lucy's booth was also used as a teaching tool by some actual therapists. Her counsel left a lasting impression. Schulz responded quickly to the Soviet Union's October 4, 1957, Sputnik satellite launch. Characters from Peanuts kept an eye on the skies for the satellite. Schulz made light of the actual launch of the dog Laika by having Snoopy send Linus into space in 1958. In the end, Snoopy became the safety mascot for NASA. Then a significant event occurred. Franklin Armstrong, Peanuts' first black character, was added by Schulz on July 31, 1968. 11 days had passed since the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Schulz had received a letter from a teacher named Harriet Glickman requesting reform. He listened despite his fear of making a mistake. Editors in the South grumbled. Schulz was also advised not to depict Franklin sitting in a classroom full of white children. No, Schulz answered. I would rather quit than erase Franklin, he stated. In the 1950s, the Peanuts merchandise empire took off. In 1952, Schulz earned $30,000 cartooning, which he used to purchase a $35,000 house. A tiny Snoopy doll was on the market by 1958. Happiness is a Warm Puppy, published in 1962, was a best-selling book for 45 weeks. Everything altered as a result. Large corporations began to contact. In 1959, Ford agreed to a 7-year contract. In 1960, Hallmark's Peanuts greeting cards were a huge success. Approximately 20,000 new Peanuts products were released annually by the 1990s. The company was making more than $1 billion a year. Schulz was earning between $30 and $40 million annually. His estate is still making millions of dollars even after his passing. He rose to become one of the world's wealthiest and most prosperous cartoonists. Something amazing occurred in 1965. On December 9, CBS broadcast a Charlie Brown Christmas. At first, the network detested it. They objected to the religious message, the jazz music, and the fact that the characters were voiced by children. They believed it would not work. However, half of all TV-owning homes in America tuned in when it aired. It was a huge success. It received a Peabody Award and an Emmy. Initially, Schulz made roughly $50,000 from it. However, it eventually made more than $50 million. A whole series of Peanuts holiday broadcasts began with that one special. Peanuts appeared in more than 1,000 publications by 1970. The strip alone was bringing in $1 million for Schulz annually. Then the reaction started. He was accused of stealing concepts from Dennis the Menace and other comics. He was even accused of stealing characters by some. Schulz had to defend his work in court. He was terribly saddened by that. Despite his victory, the charges remained with him and fueled his fear for the rest of his life. Schulz received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1975. But he was collapsing behind the scenes. Over almost 50 years, he had drawn 17,897 strips by himself. He was broken by the pressure. Due to tiredness, he was admitted to the hospital in the middle of the 1970s. He occasionally had to support his wrist to continue drawing since his hands shook so much. Physicians referred to it as an essential tremor. In 50 years, he only took one 5-week holiday. His health was almost destroyed by his perfectionism. Schulz had bids from all around the world in the 1980s, but he insisted on keeping the Peanuts characters the same. The goal of Japanese studios was to give Snoopy a more human appearance. French and Italian producers wanted Charlie Brown to behave differently, but Schulz refused. Schulz declined once more. A few transactions fell through. He didn't care that he had lost millions. He treated his characters as if they were members of his family. Instead of celebrating Peanuts' 40th birthday in 1990, Schulz shared his thoughts. He admitted to interviewers that he had battled depression all of his life. He said that he was the inspiration for Charlie Brown. He declared Charlie Brown to be the ultimate loser. That's his destiny, and it's his magic. Despite all the accomplishments, Schulz felt alone. He claimed that the real-life red-haired girl he had loved never returned his love, and that the army taught him everything he knew about loneliness. The ache persisted. In September 1973, Schulz wed Jean Clyde following his divorce from Joyce. She has 2 children and was 17 years younger. They remained together until 2000, when he passed away. But he always prioritized his work. Even during holidays and vacations, he meticulously sketched each cartoon by hand. Even if his second marriage was amicable, his workaholism's shadow persisted. Charles Schulz got into a heated argument with the man who animated his paintings in 1966. Following the tremendous success of Charlie Brown Christmas, which attracted an incredible 46.6% of all TV viewers, CBS decided to do another holiday special. However, Schulz became irate when it came time to create Charlie Brown and It's the Great Pumpkin. He felt Snoopy was being overly adorable by animator Bill Melendez. The dispute became so heated that Schulz nearly put a halt to the entire effort. There was a delay in production. CBS lost thousands of dollars when they had to rearrange their advertising. Much later than anticipated, on October 27, the special ultimately broadcast. With a budget of only $76,000, barely more than one Flintstones episode, things were made much more difficult by Schulz's meticulousness. They experienced that stress for years. Schulz was earning between $30 and $40 million annually by the middle of the 1970s. He didn't feel protected, though, despite all of that achievement. He engaged in a heated conflict with United Features Syndicate from 1974 to 1977. They asked him to add some edge and modernity to the Peanuts strip. Schulz declined. He threatened to quit if they didn't print it the way he drew it. Everyone was taken aback. They brought in Superman artist Al Plastino behind his back to covertly sketch backup Peanuts comics in case Schulz left. They earned enough money for 18 months. Schulz was incensed when he learned about it in 1977. However, he used that betrayal to obtain a significant contract rather than leaving. What happened to the strip was up to him from that point on. The confidential sketches were destroyed. Things took a further turn for the worse in the 1980s. A number of cartoonists claimed that Schulz had stolen their concepts for Snoopy's tiny bird companion, Woodstock. Originally held on April 4, 1967, Woodstock was formally renamed after the music festival in 1970. Lawsuits were made by certain artists who said Schulz had stolen their designs. There was no calm settling for Schulz. He retaliated by employing eminent copyright attorneys. The court determined that Woodstock was unique, drawing inspiration from a childhood pal and an odd Popeye cartoon figure known as Alice the Goon. Although Schulz prevailed in each case, the conflicts exposed the extent of the jealousy that went on behind the scenes. He demonstrated that he would not allow anyone to claim credit for his work, even though the litigation cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars. At the age of 59, Schulz required quadruple bypass surgery in September 1981. He had to give up drawing for the first time in 31 years. Fake Peanuts comics began appearing in more than 200 newspapers while he was recovering. There were many obscene and mature jokes in these bootleg strips. The FBI was approached by the syndicate. It was known as Operation Snoopy by the agents. They detained 12 persons after conducting raids in 6 separate states. The fakes were more than a joke. They belonged to a major counterfeiting organization. The FBI discovered fake comics, printing machinery, and international expansion plans. Additionally, Schulz's hand tremor worsened throughout this period. His drawings began to have shakier lines. Readers were able to observe the difference by 1982. Newspaper comic sections were fading by 1995. The number of peanut sheets had decreased from 2,600 to roughly 2,000. At 75, Schulz was worn out. He hinted to an early retirement in 1997. He was angry that the syndicate wanted to reduce the size of the comic or pay ghost artists to assist, and he was sick of deadlines. For 47 years, he had been drawing it by himself. There were rumors that he was being replaced by other cartoonists who were being discreetly contacted. In the same year, Schulz went on his first 5-week vacation. Old strips were republished while he slept. He used it to demonstrate that he was still needed by the world. The communication was successful. He signed a new contract in 1998. Peanuts would never be drawn by anyone else. He maintained complete control. However, 1999 arrived. Due to a clogged artery in his stomach, Schulz had emergency surgery on November 16. Doctors discovered stage 4 colon cancer during the procedure. Already, the cancer had spread. He then suffered many strokes as a result of blood clots. He had only 6 to 7 months to live, according to his physicians. Even though his health had been deteriorating all summer, nobody realized how bad it was until that day. He was 76. His vision was harmed by the strokes. He lost the ability to sketch after becoming blind in one eye. He was constantly ill from chemotherapy. Schulz was forced to retire by December. According to his son Monty, he appeared worn out and dejected. Even though his hand had been trembling for years, it was now out of control. For Monty, losing the ability to sketch was a blow to his soul. He gave up fighting. Charles Schulz announced his retirement on December 14, 1999. He sobbed while speaking with Al Roker on the Today Show. "I never imagined that this was what would happen to me," he remarked, "but now it's gone. I didn't take this away from me, but it's been taken away from me." He had a breakdown when signing his final strip. "That poor boy," he said to himself in a whisper. The football was never even kicked by him. He had a Charlie Brown-like feeling. Ultimately deceived by life. Schulz made one final request before he retired. He amended his contract to include a clause. After him, no one could carry on with Peanuts. The syndicate was taken aback. The majority of comic strips kept using new illustrators, but Schulz refused, and his family fully backed him. Approximately 95% of newspapers decided to run reruns instead of allowing anyone else to handle it once he retired. Only as he drew it, Peanuts would survive. Schulz continued to move despite having cancer. He and his daughter went ice skating on February 11, 2000. He was only a day away from passing away. At 9:45 p.m., he died quietly while sleeping. February 12. His last Sunday cartoon appeared in newspapers the next morning, February 13. It had previously been planned, and now it was a farewell letter. Snoopy is shown in the comic strip sitting at his typewriter, writing "Dear friends" and expressing gratitude to everyone. Over the course of 50 years, Schulz has drawn 17,197 strips. His death and final strip came at a nearly miraculous time, almost like anything from a work of fiction. At the time of his death, Peanuts was published in 21 languages and 2,600 newspapers in 75 countries. 355 million people read his work every day. Schulz once claimed that because he usually drew weeks in advance, the strip might outlive him. That was realized. Approximately 500 people attended his funeral after he passed away. However, when a fresh biography was published in 2007, things became tangled. David Michaelis' book, Schulz and Peanuts, contained grave allegations regarding Schulz's private life. According to the report, he was chilly, sad, and even had an affair with a woman who was 23 years younger. Monty, his son, was enraged. He referred to the book as being full of false statements and lies. According to the family, the book misrepresented Schulz's happiness and distorted the truth. Fans weren't supposed to believe this portrayal of their father. In Santa Rosa, the Charles Schulz Museum opened its doors in 2002. It contains about 7,000 of the original comics. It was intended to honor his life's labor. However, fans started to worry about the individual who drew it when the biography was released. That argument centered on the museum. Should we just respect the artwork, or should we also inquire about the artist's personal life? Charles Schulz wasn't flawless in the end, but he produced something that made hundreds of millions of people happy and comfortable. For half a century, he worked nearly every day, gave voice to silent children like Charlie Brown, and demonstrated that even the most basic drawings could have profound meaning. It truly felt like the end of an era when he passed away.